let's talk about the power of story for buy-in. We've all seen what happens when a strategy fails to inspire. Employees comply outwardly, but inwardly they disengage. Projects lose momentum and change efforts stall out. The strategy becomes just another task, not a cause anyone cares about, and that's detrimental for all of my CEO listeners. Before we go to the practical tips, I want to emphasize one transformative aspect of storytelling in leadership. Its ability to generate emotional buy-in and turn a strategy or a plan into a movement. This is really the pinnacle of what we're aiming for as leaders, isn't it? You don't just want passive agreement, you want active enrollment. People so aligned with the mission that they help drive it forward. Hello and welcome back to my relaunch podcast, now going by the name Story Driven Business Podcast. If you're new to this podcast, my name is Susanna Rantanen and I bring you business storytelling to match minds with mission. This week's episode continues from what I started last week. If you didn't listen to episode 191 just yet, I suggest you start with that one and then continue with this one. It will make so much more sense to you. In this episode of Story Driven Business Podcast, we're going to talk about how to put into practice what we learned last week about identifying the problem and the solution in our leadership communication. It's one thing to agree in theory, all right, I should tell more stories at work. It's another to actually start doing it in your day-to-day leadership. In the next part, I'll give some practical tips for CEOs, executives, and team leads on how to start learning and practicing storytelling. I want you to think of this as your storytelling starter kit. Before I go to the practical tips, I want to emphasize one more transformative aspect of storytelling in leadership. Its ability to generate emotional buy-in and turn a strategy or a plan into a movement. This is really the pinnacle of what we're aiming for as leaders, isn't it? You don't just want passive agreement, you want active enrollment. People so aligned with the mission that they help drive it forward. Okay, let's talk about the power of story for buy-in. We've all seen what happens when a strategy fails to inspire. Employees comply outwardly, but inwardly they disengage. Projects lose momentum and change efforts stall out. The strategy becomes just another task, not a cause anyone cares about, and that's detrimental for all of my CEO listeners. Storytelling can change that dynamic. By framing your strategy as a narrative, like a journey from a current challenge to an envisioned better future, you invite your team to be part of something bigger than just a checklist of deliverables. You invite them to, and I know this sounds a bit fluffy, but you actually invite them into a movement. And I want to use the word movement because I want you to think about it as a transformation, because that's what strategy is. We want to transform for what we are now, what we achieve now, into something else, right? So that's why you need that transformation. Consider how a great social movement or a big company turnaround is usually communicated. Leaders often use storytelling metaphors or rallying cries. And when Satya Nadella took over Microsoft, he famously talked about rediscovering the soul of the company. That is a narrative. And when Howard Schultz returned to Starbucks during its slump, he didn't just issue directives. He reminded everyone of the Starbucks story, the Italian espresso bar inspiration, and the idea of creating a third place for customers, effectively restoring the company around its original mission. These narratives create emotional buy-in. Employees were re-energized because they understood the deeper why and saw themselves as characters in the comeback story. One of my favorite examples in leadership storytelling is Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s "I Have a Dream" speech. This is, of course, not a business example. That principle just carries over so well. Dr. King presented a vision that was the dream. It was so tangible and emotionally powerful that it literally galvanized a movement. He didn't recite statistics about injustice, though he certainly could have. Instead, he painted a picture of children of different races holding hands in brotherhood. That story of the future was so compelling that it mobilized people at scale. And in a company setting, our stakes and scope are very different. But humans respond to narratives in any context. If you can articulate your company's dream or the movement that you want to create in your industry or community, you'll inspire employees to be activists for that change, not just 9-to-5 workers. And imagine if they are inspired to be the activists for that cause, for that change, how they're going to communicate and inspire your customers to do the same. Let's bring this into a business ROI perspective, because I know that's what you want to hear. So when employees feel that they're part of a cause or a movement, their engagement skyrockets. They don't watch the clock. They watch for opportunities to contribute. Productivity and creativity increase because people are internally motivated. And guess what? This translates to external results. Better products, better services, better customer service, better brand that attracts. Certain leadership creates a ripple effect. Customers can tell when they interact with genuinely engaged, purpose-driven employees, and it becomes magnetic. In employer branding terms, the stories leadership tells internally inevitably flow outward. If you as a leader frequently share stories, let's say about how your product or service changes lives, your team will adopt that narrative and share it in their own words with friends, with their family, or on social media with their networks. Suddenly, your strategy becomes a story that everyone knows and repeats, and that is how it turns into a movement. People want to be part of something meaningful. It's a fundamental human drive. And I know that you've heard about it a million times. As a leader, you have that opportunity to frame your strategy as something meaningful. It could be an audacious goal. One of our customers have an audacious goal, and I love it. It's such a powerful way to inspire their employees to carry out the strategy. It could be a moral mission, like we stand for Y and we're rallying to make it reality. Or it could be a redemption story, like we've stumbled, but here's how we'll rise. So you want to give your people a narrative arc that they can champion. I'll give you a quick real example from a client, not naming any names. This company was implementing a major sustainability initiative. I think that it was pretty dry stuff on the surface, like reduce carbon footprint, switch to renewable energy. I mean, the way it was first told wasn't compelling. Initially, the communication was just so technical. It was like the percentages of reduction and the timelines and the budgets. And they wanted all of this to be included in their employer branding. And I have to say that I struggled a little bit. And I knew that their employees would shrug too, because, personally, I shrugged just hearing about it. People felt that it sounded like extra work and extra cost for very vague benefits. But this was turned around by communication, helping the leadership to reframe that rollout. And I'm so appreciative that they did that. So the CEO started telling a personal story at each of they call it town halls, but like where everyone gathers, like all of their staff gathers together. And he shared the story about why he cared about sustainability on a personal level. So he talked about his kids hiking, loving the nature, how they on the weekends would, as a family, go together to hikes and whatever, noticing the changes in the environment over the years and how he realized that he had to take the responsibility as a business leader to ensure that the next generation has a healthier planet. And this wasn't a polished marketing story. It was a genuine personal conviction. Then he linked that to the company. And he said that we have an opportunity to lead, to be part of the solution, not the problem anymore. And here's what it looks like for us. And then he painted a very vivid picture of a future where the company's headquarters would run on clean energy and set an example in their community as a responsible organization. And now together with the support of communication, the CEO invited employees to share ideas that would make them proud of being part of that journey, that specific environmental responsible journey. And the difference in reception was like night and day. Employees formed voluntary green teams to contribute ideas, and they created that kind of a movement quite, internally, quite organically. Not only did they hit their sustainability targets, but employee engagement scores on those sustainability activities rose because people felt that they actually had a role in that story and they felt pride in taking part and sharing about it. And externally, the company's brand got a boost too because that pride showed up in how employees talked about their work. Now, the point is storytelling can turn strategy into a story and that story into a shared mission and that shared mission into a journey where you invite your target audience, your employees, to take part of, and they all understand that they now actually have a very meaningful role in this whole journey. A strategy by itself is about what and how, and story adds that why and who. It gives everyone a role to play. I've endlessly talked about making your people the heroes. Not sure if you've heard that as a leader, but I know that most of my podcast listeners from the pure employer branding episodes know it by heart. The talent is the hero. And in that magnetic employer branding method that I've developed, the first principle is exactly that. The talent, which is your people, they are the hero of your story, not the company. So when leaders communicate in a way that makes their employees or their customers the heroes, positions the company or the leadership individuals, the management board, as the guide or the catalyst, you get a massive buy-in. People can see themselves in that narrative. It's no longer your strategy. It becomes our story. When it's our story, we all want to see a happy ending. So we are all willing to put the effort to get there. You see what I mean? People see themselves in that narrative. All right. Hopefully I've convinced you that storytelling can indeed rally people and create movements at work. And now it's time to get practical. Let's say you're sold on this concept, but you're thinking, what do I actually do on a Monday morning to start becoming a better storyteller as a leader? Fear not, here are some concrete tips for you. So, how to start practicing storytelling today as a leader. Whether you're a CEO or a department head or an emerging team leader, you can start building your storytelling skills right away. Think of it as learning a new language, because language of narrative it is. Here are some actionable tips to get you started. So the first tip is know your core message. That's like start with the why. Before you even craft a story, be clear on the why behind what you are communicating. What is the core message or the value that you want to convey? What is the one thing that you want the audience remember after you've finished? If you can't distill the point into a sentence or two, you're not ready to tell the story. Use Simon Sinek's advice. Identify why it matters. For example, if you're introducing a new project Ask yourself, why do I believe in this? That conviction will guide your story. Why do you believe in it? It might be to solve a customer problem, which means that you can reach your sales targets more effectively. It could be to improve employees' daily work life, which means that you can help your team members to actually be happier and more effective at work and balance their work and personal life better. Or it could be to achieve a vision that excites you. Clarity on that message of yours will ensure your story has a strong anchor and doesn't start wondering about. Second tip, make your audience the hero. And this is a big mindset shift. As a leader, you might be used to being the protagonist of your story or in communications, like, I need my vision to be understood. I will lead you there. Think of this as use less of I or me and much more of you. Try flipping it. Frame your communication with your employees or other audience members, making them the hero, the protagonist of the story, and position yourself as a guide, as a mentor, someone who is meant to inspire and enable action, using your wisdom, your charm, your experiences, your knowledge, and your empathy to helping them get there where you want to get them. In storytelling terms, if your team members are the Luke Skywalkers, you are the Yoda. I personally identify myself as the Yoda. Remember the magnetic employer branding principle. The employer, the leader, is the trusted guy. This is the position that you as a leader need to own so that your storytelling skills will actually become magnificent. Practically, this means that when you tell a story or about a new initiative, you have to highlight how your team or an individual team member can shine or go through it, rather than how brilliant this plan is that you made or how magnificent the company will become as a result of it, or how amazing you are as a leader. Offer your guidance, offer that wisdom of yours, offer an inspiring vision, but let them see themselves as the main characters who will carry it out. This approach is inherently more motivating because people want to be the hero of their own story, and your story simply casts their role in the larger play. The third example is use real examples and anecdotes. Start collecting a bank of short anecdotes from day-to-day business life. This doesn't have to be yours. You can also get them from the internet or use generative AI to create anecdotes for you. They could be about customer success stories, employee achievements, lessons from failures, or other personal moments that taught you something vital about work or relevant to work. And having these on hand makes it easier to spice up your communication. So next time you're preparing a presentation or an email, instead of leading with abstract information, lead with an example. For instance, rather than saying that team collaboration is important, start with, last month, our sales and product teams partnered on that client demo. I heard how Kim and Anna worked late together to customize the presentation. That collaboration won us the deal. So let's talk about how we can enable more of that. Now, I'm sure you see that immediately the grounds in the message form a concrete story. It grabs attention. It makes the lesson so much more clear without you having to spell it out. Commit to sharing at least one story in your next team meeting. It can be as brief as a few sentences. And the more you do it, the more natural it will feel. The fourth example is keep it simple and relatable. You're not trying to win an Oscar for screenwriting. You're trying to communicate more clearly in an inspiring and actionable manner. Keep your story simple in structure. A beginning is the situation, a middle is the challenge or the action, and the end is the outcome or the lesson. And use language that is relatable and not overly corporate. It's perfectly fine, even ideal, to say imagine or I remember when or do you remember when Or let me tell you about what happened to our client last week. Don't worry about sounding informal, because conversational tone is what actually draws people in. Tailor your story to your audience. If you're speaking to frontline employees, make sure the story speaks to their daily reality. If it's to executives, maybe a higher level strategic story. Or if it's a customer audience, then obviously you want to make it so that it speaks to their daily reality. In all cases, avoid jargon that could dilute the emotional impact. This is Luna. Donald Miller's rule applies here too. If you want people to stick with you, make sure that they can understand it fast. Simplicity is not dumbing it down. It's removing friction so that the story hits the hearts and the mind without getting lost in translation. The fifth one, show vulnerability and honesty. As a leader, you set the tone for authenticity. Don't be afraid to occasionally share stories where you're not the flawless hero, because it could be a mistake that taught you something or an obstacle that you had to overcome with the help of others. Brené Brown's work that I talked about in last week's episode reminds us that showing vulnerability can actually increase people's trust in you, because it shows that you're actually real. You're human too. Surprise! Of course, you want to keep it appropriate and constructive. The story should always have a purpose and a positive takeaway. For example, that I learned the importance of asking for help, or that failure pushed me to develop a better process. When you open up, you give permission to your team to be honest as well, which can foster a culture of openness and continuous learning. An honest story beats a polished slide deck in winning hearts any day. Number 6, practice in low-stakes settings. Now, if you're nervous about storytelling, practice when the pressure is low. Try incorporating a little story in your next one-to-one conversation or in an email. Notice the reaction. You might be pleasantly surprised, because people often respond warmly because stories are just so engaging. You can also practice by writing your stories down. Some leaders keep a journal or a document of leadership stories, just jotting down their experiences and the lessons from them. Kind of like keeping a diary, but then with the purpose of using those later. Writing, of course, helps you organize your thoughts, and you can later pull from this library of yours when you need an anecdote or a story. Think of it as preparing your leadership story kit, much like you'd prepare content for a speech. Over time, you'll have a trove of go-to stories for different messages: a story for resilience, or a story for innovation, a story for teamwork, and so on. The 7th one is learn from the best. I want you to observe great storytellers and borrow techniques. Watch TED Talks by speakers like Simon Sinek, Donald Miller, Brené Brown. Check out speeches by leaders known for their storytelling, like Jobs. His iPhone launch in 2007 is a classic. Must watch it. He told a story of the smartphone revolution in a way anyone could grasp it. When you watch it, notice how he structures the talk, how he uses pauses, how he builds anticipation or uses metaphors. I often recommend Donald Miller's StoryBrand framework as a simple model for crafting a message, because it involves a character that is a person in your audience who has a problem, who meets a guide, which is you, your company, who gives them a plan and then calls them to action. That results in success and helping them to avoid failure. It's straight out of movies, but it works for business communication too. You don't need to explicitly map this out every time, but internalizing these beats, the framework, can help you craft more compelling narratives and messages. Additionally, you probably might want to pay attention to stories in your everyday life. Maybe like a book or a podcast, or even a friend telling a story can help you. Just ask yourself, what made it exciting for you? Was it the vivid detail, the emotion, the twist, the more you attune yourself to paying attention to how to tell stories, the more naturally you'll incorporate those learnings as elements in your own stories. The eighth one is inviting stories from others. This is a tip that not only helps you, but also empowers your people. Encourage others in your team to share their stories and perspectives. In meetings, you can say, could someone share a quick story of a win or a challenge from this week? And when someone does, listen and celebrate it. By doing this, you create a storytelling culture. And that takes the pressure off of you to be the only storyteller and generating also a wealth of narratives that everyone can learn from. And it also signals that you value personal experiences, personal expressions, and lessons learned, not just those cold results. Over time, this practice can make teams more cohesive because people bond over stories. They find common ground or inspiration. And as a leader, you can then pick up on those stories and weave them into larger messages. For example, if an employee shares a creative solution they tried, you might highlight that story company-wide as an example of innovation, because now you're amplifying the storytelling. Implementing all these tips can start small. You don't have to overhaul your entire communication style overnight. Try one or two of them, but try them this week. Maybe then you decide, in my next email, I'll open with a short story instead of a data dump. Or in the next executive presentation, I'll frame the challenge by narrating a customer's experience. These might seem like subtle changes, but they set you on that path to more engaging leadership communication. Remember, every story has a beginning. And your journey to become a story-driven leader starts with the first story that you choose to tell. Don't worry if it's not perfect. Authenticity always trumps perfection. With practice, you'll find your voice and your team will start responding. Now, there's one more important angle that we need to discuss, how all of this ties into employer branding and company culture on a broader level. I want to connect the dots fully for you. So your personal communication style as a leader, your storytelling, doesn't just influence the day-to-day operations of your team, but it actually shapes the entire culture of your organization and your reputation in the talent market. It is an equally visible cue to your leadership style than your behavior as a leader at work and outside work. So I want to explore that a little bit, and then we'll conclude with some final inspiration and takeaways. The powerful truth is your internal culture and external brand are two sides of the same coin, and storytelling is the link between them. It's the bridge, the invisible bridge. The stories you tell internally and the way you tell them will inevitably flow outward, influencing how current and prospective employees perceive your organization. And the same goes towards your current and prospective customers. As a leader, your voice often sets the tone of the entire company or for the entire company. Now think about the company culture as the collection of the stories that we tell ourselves internally about how we work, about why we work. If employees constantly hear their CEO managers communicating through engaging narratives that highlight the purpose, the values, and appreciation, they absorb those stories and retell them. If, on the other hand, leadership communication is dry, purely tactical, or fear-based, that becomes the internal story. Around here, it's all about the numbers and nothing else. Every message you send is planting a culture seed. Over time, those seeds grow into the folklore of your company. Why does this matter in employer branding? Well, employer branding is essentially how your company is perceived as a workplace, what employees say about it, what candidates believe about it, and nothing shapes that more than how leaders communicate. A leader's personal communication style becomes part of the company identity. If you are an inspirational storyteller, your organization gets a reputation internally and externally for having visionary leadership and clear, compelling mission. This attracts talent. People want to work for leaders who give them that sense of purpose, but it also attracts customers. Conversely, if leadership is known to communicate poorly or unemotionally, that can repel talent, or at least fail to attract the best people who have options and are looking for meaning, not just a paycheck. Let's find some insights from my book, Story-Driven Employer Branding, to illustrate the connection. The core framework explained in my book is the magnetic employer branding method, which, as mentioned, leverages storytelling to match the minds and aspirations of talent with the mission of your company. A key starting point is acknowledging a simple reality. Talented people don't join companies, they join futures that they believe in. That line encapsulates why storytelling is essential from a leadership perspective. As a leader, when you communicate your vision as a compelling future, a narrative of what tomorrow looks like at your company and why it matters and to whom it matters, you're effectively painting a future that people can choose to join. You're selling a future, a narrative of growth, impact, moving forward, transformation, purpose, rather than just a job. Leaders who master this attract people who believe in that future, who want to be the characters in your story. That is so powerful for recruiting and retention because those folks are inherently more motivated and inspired and aligned. Another principle from my book, Story-Driven Employer Branding, says to attract and retain top talent, position yourself as their trusted guide and your talent as the hero. Now, we discussed this in a context of daily leadership, but it's equally a branding strategy for you as a leader and for your business towards your customers and current and future employees. When employees feel that leadership is there to guide and empower, inspire, and enable them, and that the company story is built around their success, the employee's success, they are more engaging, more loyal. This is what builds what I call sustainable affinity. They see your company as the place that enables me to achieve my aspirations rather than just the place that uses me to achieve its goals. Of course, they're not going to say that aloud to you, but they talk about it vocally on social media. This kind of relationship comes from leaders who communicate with empathy and vision like a mentor in a story, not a boss that's just barking orders. And guess what? Employees talk. In the lunchroom, on LinkedIn, on Glassdoor, on TikTok, Snapchat. They share how it feels to work at your company. Their stories about you become part of your brand. If they often say our CEO always shares the why behind decisions, and it really inspires us. Or my manager starts meeting with stories of customers, which remind us why our work matters. Those anecdotes become a selling point for your culture. Internal trust is another piece of this puzzle. So effective storytelling by leadership can boost trust scores significantly. Trust is the bedrock of a strong culture. When trust is high, retention is higher, and people become ambassadors for your brand, even organically without you needing to ask for it. And they don't even have to work for you for them to become your advocates. They recommend friends to apply. They boast about their company with pride. All of that starts with them trusting leadership, which in turn comes from consistent, authentic communication. In other words, your storytelling habit. On the flip side, poor communication erodes that trust and it erodes your culture. People fill in narrative gaps with rumors or assumptions, and usually they assume the worst. As a leader, you can proactively provide this transparent narrative, especially during changes or crises, so that you can keep the trust bank full. Let's not forget about the external talent and talent attraction. Employer branding is not just the HR's job, even though I like HR to own it. It's profoundly influenced by you leaders. These days, potential hires scrutinize leaders just as much as they do the company itself. Thanks to social media and those platforms like LinkedIn or podcasts like this, leaders often have a public voice. If you regularly share insightful stories or demonstrate a compelling narrative about your industry and your company's role in it, talent will notice. CEOs blog or post on LinkedIn about their company's journey and values, learning moments, personal stories, personal moments, personal experiences during those journeys within the companies. Those posts are mini stories. They give outsiders that peek into the company culture. When authentic, they can excite someone to say that I want to work for that kind of a leader. Donald Miller's quote about customers applies to candidates too. Candidates also buy your company or don't. So in other words, either they choose you or they don't. The workplaces they choose are the workplaces that they understand and feel drawn to the fastest. And if your company's story, as told through your leadership, is clear and magnetic, top talent will understand quickly why they should join in, and they'll feel it's a place where they can belong and thrive. In short, your storytelling as a leader creates a narrative thread that runs from inside the company through the employee experiences to the outside of the company to employee brand reputation. And it influences internal trust, retention, and attraction. And as you strengthen that muscle, you might find it beneficial to formalize it. So companies even create an internal story bank or hold storytelling workshops for leaders and managers as part of leadership development. The idea is to bake storytelling into how the company operates, ensuring continuity of narrative at all levels, because it shouldn't be just the CEO telling the stories. Culture is lived and conveyed by all the leaders at every level. So if you're a CEO, you may want to encourage your managers to emulate this style. If you're a manager, know that your direct influence on your team's culture is just huge. And your communication style is a big part of that. One more insight. In an age where employee branding and company culture are key competitive advantage, especially in knowledge-strong industries, those who can story drive their culture have the edge. Many companies have similar perks, benefits, or even the pay. What truly differentiates a workplace is the sense of purpose and belonging, which comes from the stories that you guys tell, guys and girls and everyone, what people hear and tell forward about working there. And by being intentional in crafting and sharing those stories, you essentially brand your culture in the minds of your people and your candidates and your customers, because especially knowledge-rich industries, customers are also drawn into companies that tell stories and they can understand the role of their employees within the store, because oftentimes they are actually in direct connection with those employees. The best businesses don't just market products, they brand their people, culture, values, and future through storytelling. That's how you become magnetic. All right. I've covered a lot of ground, and little Luna is getting frustrated that she's also locked in this space and can't get out of here. So let's just wrap this up. Storytelling might indeed be the most underrated leadership skill in business, but I hope that after today's deep dive, it's now on your radar as a skill for you to embrace and develop. People will forget endless data and forget those bland instructions, but they won't forget a good story that made them feel something. When you lead with a story, you lead with emotion and purpose, not just intellect or data. And when you consistently do that, you are not just managing a team or executing a strategy, you're building a legacy. You are setting vision and values in a way that people will carry on even when you're not in the room. How about that? Thank you for listening. My name is Susanna Rantanen, and I bring you story-driven branding in a world where attention is no longer a default. Until next time, keep leading with purpose and stay story-driven.